This is Josh Zimmerman. I am out here in Wilmington, North Carolina. I graduated from Monterey Institute or Middlebury Institute of International Studies in 2016 with an MBA.
And you went on to have a career of which things you can say about and things you might not be able to talk about the career you had after the institute.
Yeah, it was had kind of a career before the institute and after, so it's been a wild journey. And yeah, Ms. definitely Middlebury played a huge role in all of it.
So one of the things that we're hinting around with that sort of very obtuse talk about is you work in the intelligence field as an analyst, looking at information, at facts, at things you don't know if it's a fact or not, and trying to put it together to inform policymakers and military leaders about decisions that they're going to make. Is that a fair assessment of what an analyst does?
That's a very fair assessment. I think an intelligence analyst, they pull lots of different pieces of information together, try to make sense of what is occurring in a far off land, and write reports for policymakers to make decisions. And sometimes they're focused on one issue, and that's all their focus is. Other times, it's much more strategic and big picture. But it's a very varied career field.
How did the institute, what made you want to go there? You could have chosen anywhere that you went. And then how did your experience at the institute prepare you for the field afterwards?
Yeah, so I started my career right out of school in the intelligence community, and I left that to pursue some other adventures, and then I wanted to get back into the federal government. But I wanted to live in California. I wanted to, go to a really small school that was very specialized. And there's only one place to really do that, and that was the Middlebury Institute out in Monterey. I met some people in the intelligence community that had gone there for graduate school, and I said, "Wow, this looks like a really cool and unique place." But I also wanted to gain business skills, so I kind of did both. I got an MBA, but I also took classes in the terrorism nonproliferation department too, and had a lot of great opportunities right out of school after Ms. And I ended up choosing to stay in the private sector, but I think if I ever wanted to go back to the government, I could definitely do that.
Were you surprised at the breadth of education that was available at the institute?
Oh yeah, I was super surprised, and I think it's so wide and varied, and it's a small school, so you could really take a lot of different diversity of classes, as well as the student population as well. I learned so much from other students, just as I did from the professors themselves. So that was pretty cool.
The community is sort of, it's like a self-training machine learning model. You're really learning from each other and then going out and creating a new world out
Yeah.
there after graduation. We're talking today because you wrote a book. You wrote a book sort of inspired by, I don't want to say based on, I'm going to say inspired by your experiences. And we'll talk about some of the specifics of the book in a moment, but the blurbs on the cover and the back cover book always are a point of pride for a writer. Like someone said something great about my book. Look here, everybody. This is why you should read it. Yours come from the Department of Defense. Things like, we spent more time looking at this the book than any other fiction we've ever looked at. Why is that a point of pride for you as an author?
Well, that's a great question. Because I think when the government came back to me and said, "Hey, like this thing is crazy," like they redacted a ton of information. We've passed it on to multiple different organizations and agencies have reviewed it and saying it was the most comprehensive fiction they've ever reviewed to date. For me, I mean, knowing that other authors who have worked in the government and intelligence community have gone through that process, but maybe they didn't find that same level of stringency is sort of a source of pride, because it is like maybe I did write something that was close to reality and that was plausible scenario. Um, and so I felt like, hey, that's a great way to tagline the book and get people excited about it, because it was true.
Maybe, and I don't know, of course, this is an assumption or a question, that the level of attention from the DoD for the book you wish you might have gotten for your real intelligence analysis reports.
Yeah, yeah, there's probably a lot of truth to that. You don't really know sometimes who's reading those as well.
So the book, it's fiction, but it is definitely sort of based on ideas that are out there in the mainstream that we sort of pick up from the news. As you were writing it, we were like, oh, I'm going to go too far in this. I'm saying too much, but I'm going to try to keep it in. Or this is something that people don't really see how these pieces all go together. So I'm excited to shed some light on that. Was that an experience you had while you were writing it?
Yeah, definitely. I think we heard a lot in the news in 2017, 2018 about ISIS, ending in the Middle East. And I thought to myself, well, what happens if that group isn't really gone? That ideology still exists in the Middle East. And I wanted to write a book that was based off of a fictitious scenario about them reemerging and establishing stronger ties with another group in the region. It's very far out of left field, but it is certainly plausible, the scenario that I draw up. And, what happens if ISIS comes back even more powerful? So I wasn't really thinking about the news. I was sort of just thinking about potential of what it could be in the future.
Like any speculative fiction writer, what's
Yeah,
going on now? And let's take it to an extreme and explore what that idea might be like.
exactly.
One of the
Exactly.
characters described is an intelligence analyst that takes a twisted tale no one wants to believe. Was this a version of a person I'm talking to right now who may have had this experience?
Yeah, I don't think I'll give myself that much credit. I was just a lowly analyst. But I think the way the one of the main characters, he formulates multiple assessments that this group has their hands on something truly terrible, and policymakers continue to ignore that reality. I don't think my analysis ever made it all the way up to that high level of influence, but I'd like to think, that's where the fiction comes into play there.
You would hope that you wouldn't see a piece of intelligence and be like, oh my gosh, this is apocalyptic information that I'm looking at here. How much can you talk about that sort of things that you saw, where it came from, and then how you shared your ideas with the people above you in the chain of command?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you work in intelligence, you're assigned, at least where I was, you're assigned a couple of different targets, a couple of areas that you're really responsible for, and you're writing it. You have a mentor who's kind of helping you out, coaching you, helping you improve your writing. And, you know, when I was there was really strong kind of chain of command. But if you got out a report that had the potential of having high visibility, they would escalate it all the way up to potentially even the president, right? The presidential daily brief, 6 days a week, the president gets this report. Um, and so I did have a couple reports go up to that level, which was really, really exciting, but it's all through like a very kind of hierarchical review process.
So when you can tell friends and loved ones, the president read my work, it was like maybe a sentence out of a page that you had written that got boiled down to
Yeah, maybe it was a paragraph.
a
It was a
pair.
paragraph.
Oh,
Yeah. But I mean, they're getting that report like 6 days a week, so it's
the information that you're being paid to look at as part of your job, you wanted the job, you pursued the job. It's a job that's highly selective. It's got to be high pressure. There's got to be like the pressure to do the right thing, to notice the right thing, to find the right detail that can make the difference in literally someone's life or death. How do you live with that pressure every day?
That's a great question. So I think intelligence is there to make sense of what is happening on the ground. It's not meant to be, I think there's varying levels of confidence level, right? Low, medium, and high. And you constantly have to balance, you know, based off of various sources of information, how confident are you with this level of analysis? And you have to make that recommendation in your writing, in your briefs. And it's really up to the policymakers or the operators, if you're working with special forces, to make the ultimate decision of, okay, I've got all this intelligence. It's medium to high confidence. do we feel like we have enough to green light and go after this target or do this scenario? And it's really on them, but that puts a heavy responsibility on you to ensure that you do everything you can to tell the most complete picture. And if you don't, you need to be really upfront about that. And I think we've seen countless examples of when intelligence isn't fully baked and policymakers make decisions without really sound intelligence. You could look, you don't have to look too far back in history to see some examples.
You do not. That infected whole countries of history, those sort of decisions that were
Yeah,
made.
yeah,
How
exactly.
did the thing you just described? I'm coming up with something that I know. I'm writing. I'm presenting something in the best way that I can. I'm going to pass it on to somebody else. That's a lot like a student writing a paper. You do your homework, you do your research, you draft your research paper, and you pass it on. Something you've done countless times at the institute. Did that institute experience help you write better intelligence reports?
Oh, 100%. I think being able to, formulate an idea, put together an assessment and a report based off of like real world scenarios of what is actually happening in the globe. That's a lot of what we did at the Institute. It's like, hey, take X, Y, and Z. It's happening right now. I want you to write a report. I want you to present it to your professors and your classmates or your clients. And and that's all you do in intelligence is that's your job day in and day out. It's research, write, brief, repeat. Yeah.
Let's talk some specifics about. You have two books. You have a book about how to become an intelligence analyst, which is out there, and people can sort of follow your path on there. And then you have this fiction book. The title of the book is.
Deadly Sands.
Oh, how'd you come up with that? You must have had a list of things. You're like, which one is it going to be? Deadly Sands is the one you picked. Why that title?
Ooh, I don't know. I think it just kind of spoke to me. It kind of appealed more to a broader audience. I felt like I was going to get really niche in some, geeky government speak, but I wanted to keep it more high level. Um, and the book takes place in the deserts of Syria and Iraq, and they're deadly.
They sure are.
Yeah.
And no spoilers, but in the very beginning of the book is a person who has a strong belief that it is their destiny to reignite this battle between good and evil as they see it on Earth. And they are working towards creating and working with a team for a weapon of mass destruction that they're planning on using. Like, there's no doubt that they will use it if they're able to get it completed. And there's a line in there that I just love. It's towards the end of the part that I've been reading. It says, a force gripped his body from all sides as he has this realization right after the talk about what they need to do to actually make the dirty bomb. And I just liked that idea of he was surrounded by this explosive pressure that would turn that character into this nuclear bomb, just like an atomic bomb works itself. And I thought that was a lovely little image that you created and layered throughout there. So I just wanted to talk about the little of the pressure that you may have read about of these people who really want to change the world in a very dramatic way.
So in terms of like, what motivates them
Yeah,
or
or
like,
what have you, the stuff that you've read and you've learned, which is different from what people pick up from the media, like what is really driving them? Is they have these are honest beliefs of theirs of good and evil.
yeah, I mean, I think if you ask any institute professor who studies nonproliferation and terrorism, right, there is an apocalyptic agenda with really some hardcore, radical ideologies out there. And I think that's their ultimate goal is, the apocalypse to return something to the previous state without everyone else. And that requires mass destruction. And I think if you read, some of the scholarly texts, you will see actual references to apocalypse, changing the world, cleansing it. It's some pretty scary stuff, and I think there's different ranges of radicalness, but some of the senior leaders, guys like Abu Bakr, al-Baghdadi, these were all, kind of things that they thought when they reestablished the Islamic Caliphate.
And those are names that come up in the book as mentors, role models, visionaries, as these characters see them, that they want to emulate in the behavior
Correct.
that they are planning.
Correct.
There is a
Yeah.
detail in the book. It's fascinating. In fact, you as the author sort of make an aside about it. Like, we don't know why everybody loves these Toyota trucks. Can you talk about those Toyota trucks. We see them in video and photos all of the time. Why?
Good question. Honestly, I have no idea. Maybe because they're cheap and they've been proliferated all throughout the world. They're really durable too, and they're great cars. I mean, if you've ever had a Toyota, my first car was a Toyota Camry. It was like a champ. Toyotas just have a great brand. And I think in that part of the world, they're easy to come by, low maintenance. They work really well in hot weather in the desert. And you could strap stuff into the beds really easily as well, whether that's a weapon system, bench to hold people, the tent, who knows? Like they're very durable.
It's just fascinating to see. It was because I've seen those vehicles everywhere. And so that it's mentioned in the book, I was like, oh, I sure want to ask about that. It's obviously not something that just I noticed. When people read the book, when they close that last page and they finish the story that you're telling, are you hoping they're going to take action in some way to start advocating for a more peaceful world? Are you just looking for entertainment? Are you looking to shine a light into the world of an analyst and what it's like to be that? What is your hope for audiences when they finish?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the ultimate hope is like knowing that there are people working on, really intense threats to the nation, to the globe. They're very analytical and they're putting together a puzzle every day. And that puzzle gets bigger and bigger and bigger as they go. And I want, any reader to walk away with, wow, there's people out there that this is what they do for their job. If you read most thrillers, you will see that they're, single point of character, Jason Bourne type, Jack Ryan, very, out there in the tipping spear. But there's behind people like that, if they exist, there are collections of analysts who put together a picture. And I think the analytical world of intelligence, they're creating that picture for policymakers. So I hope that people walk away with a stronger understanding with that, as well as, maybe some insights into what a foreign fighter feels like if he was to leave everything behind to join a group like ISIS or the leader of ISIS. I really try to get inside their heads while writing the book.
Just a couple more questions. One last one is a fun one. Like when you're watching thrillers, you mentioned a couple of characters or books or watching a Mission Impossible movie, and there's that person watching the computer screen and they're hacking into the system and all this stuff. Do you just sort of go like, yeah, all right, I guess this is how the story is, or are you looking for like real, like, oh, that's the thing that happens? And how critical are you of these narratives as you're consuming them?
I think when I was in the government, I was much more critical. Now that I'm no longer in it, I'm kind of just like look at it for entertainment. But sometimes, I think as time has gone, they get closer to reality than you would expect. So
Oh, that's interesting to think about. Last question
yeah.
for you, Josh. Thank you so much for joining me and talking. It's so great to hear you talk about your work and what you're bringing to the world in the conversation about these kind of things. If I'm a 17, 18-year-old person out there and I'm like fascinated by these ideas, and you talk a little bit about it in your book about how to become an analyst, what sort of classes should I take in high school or in undergraduate college that can help prepare me for this career path?
That's a great question. I would say having a really strong understanding of writing, of really really sound writing practices, grammar, syntax, putting together different pieces of information, and then I would say also critical thinking, right? Right, being able to deal with a lot of ambiguity to put together a picture of what's happening. Um, I think, and being really well read on lots of different topics. It's like reading history, reading about what's happening in the world. So take classes where you can read things, present them, write about them, learn about what's happening in the world, and just continue to practice that skill set so you get really good at it.
One last question.
Yeah.
How do you suggest people approach thinking about our global neighbors without going down into fear and stereotypes and bigotry? There are people who have different feelings about how government should be, what the world should be structured, a belief system. It's very, very easy to otherize people. How do you approach keeping a more humanist attitude towards others on our planet?
It's a great question, and I talk about that a little bit in the book, and I think it's all about being empathetic, right? Putting yourself in the other person's shoes, right? Let's look at like how Israel and Palestine, or the Palestinians, right? They're both doing what they're doing because of how they feel and how they see the world. And I think if you understand both sides, you can maybe create a more holistic picture of what's happening. Same within Russia and Ukraine. I think there's a lot of different situations, and same with people here in the US. I moved from California and now I'm in the South. It's a very different world here. But I think if you can kind of take a step back, put yourself in other people's shoes, you can understand their perspective a lot better. It's hard. It's a hard thing to do, but I think that would make the world a little happier if people did that more.
Thank you so much.